Are we on? Microphone check. Oh, all right. Good? All righty. Well, welcome to We Are Red Hat Week. I can't believe it's already here again. I feel like we just wrapped up last year, but it's always fun to work with the branding team to get the Lunch and Learn coordinated with you guys. Some of you in the room might recognize a familiar face. We're happy that we're able to coordinate with nutritionist Andrea Grun to get her in here today to talk about nutritional labels. So before we get started, I want to point out just a few things for people in the room. We do want you to ask questions throughout the presentation, but just do want to bring up the point that if you have a question, wait until we can get a mic to you because we do have people dialed in blue jeans, so we want to make sure they can actually hear the question. So raise your hand, we'll get you a mic, ask your question, and Andrea will be happy to answer it for you. But with that, let's welcome Andrea Grun to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Happy to be with you here today. Do see some familiar faces, which is always fun for me. People I've gotten to meet over the years and some new faces too. There is, I'm going to mention one, maybe commercial for myself. I'm the dietitian that comes and makes on-site visits with you guys. So for you folks here or even the remote folks, if you ever want to meet to discuss nutrition questions or problems or issues, I am on site in the tower at least one day a month, and there'll be information that comes out about how to schedule those appointments when the email comes out with the summary and information at the end. But that's just something that's a benefit for you guys. You all have, under your Cigna policy, 6 visits per benefit year, and I don't charge any copays or anything. It's just whatever Cigna reimburses. So it turns out to be a free visit for y'all. So I always want to mention that because it's a really good benefit. And years ago, Red Hat negotiated the 6 benefits with Cigna. Other Cigna policies don't have that. So I just want to make sure that you guys know it. If you choose to see a dietitian outside, someone other than myself that does provide Cigna benefits, they'll have to understand the different benefit structure with Red Hat. Okay, so that being said, yes, I love questions. So as we're going along today several times, and look, it's going to be hard. I've got to stay within my zone here, so I'll try not to wander out for you people remotely watching. Love questions. I'm going to answer them along the way. I'm going to ask if you have questions. If you do, like I said, raise your hand. We want to make sure everybody can hear the question, and I will answer them the best of my ability. So that being said, I think that's all I need to do housekeeping-wise. Let's jump in, and we're going to talk about food labels, right? One of the most confusing things to a lot of people. So I'm going to try and simplify this and really point out some key areas to look at. Some of this information will be included in handouts that will come after the presentation. So I'll try and remember to say this is on a handout and this is on a handout. If there's something additional I need to send out afterwards, or again, this is being recorded, so you can always watch this again if you need to review something that's not in one of the handouts. All right, you guys. So when you think about what's most important to you, right, when you look at a food label, what do you look at? Okay, I'm actually going to let you shout out the answers this time. Calories. Does anyone look at anything else in particular? Fat, the protein. Yeah, some of my athletes are looking at the protein a little bit more. We look at all kinds of different things, right? And for some of us, we focus on one specific thing. Sometimes we want to look at the big picture. Sometimes it's, again, can change from day to day. Maybe calories this month, in 3 months from now, I'll be in a high protein diet for some reason, or I'm watching my sugar more closely. So what I'm looking at might change. So when we look at not just the nutrition information, but the actual ingredient label, I want you to understand that the ingredients are listed when you look and see, again, on the package what it contains. Ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. So it's not necessarily a volume. Something fluffy may have a lot of volume, but not a lot of weight. They had to figure out how they were going to list them, and so they're listed by weight. So in this example, you're going to see the first ingredient listed is sugar. That means by weight, there's more sugar than anything else in this food product. Now, if we see the first ingredient listed as sugar, how many of us are really going to buy it? Okay, unless it's like candy corn or something for Halloween, right? But most of the time, if you and I say we looked at a cereal label and I saw sugar was the first ingredient, we're not going to buy it. Food manufacturers have figured this out. So what has happened, or what they do now, they won't list sugar, I'll say that, let me change that. They won't use sugar as an ingredient. They will use several different forms of sugar as ingredients. They may use 3 different types of sugar. They may use sucrose and dextrose. Maybe they'll put some fructose in there. So they will use various forms of sugar so that it's not one of the first, second, or third ingredients. It'll be listed several times on the label, but farther down on the label. Does that make sense? So again, they know that when we look at food labels, they've kind of figured it out. They keep up with these things, that when we see something that's one of the top 3 or 4 ingredients that is kind of a buzz item like sugar or a fat item right now, we may not buy the product based on what the package says. So they've manipulated the label some to play us a little bit. Part of what we're going to do today is learn how they're playing us so we can really, again, find the things that we want. So this is something I want you to be aware of. Sometimes we look at a food label and this is what we think, right? I mean, is anything in there actually food? They use all these different words and terms and we don't know what they are. Sometimes, again, even the words they'll use for sugar can be confusing. If you don't know that dextrose is a sugar, you may look at that word and go, okay, well, what is that? It's sugar. They're just using a different form for whatever reasons. So what really is on the nutrition facts label and how can we use it? So it tells you what is in the food and how much or how many nutrients are in a food. So we really want to use it to help us make that informed choice. That's the point of the whole thing. Here's an example of a label. And for you folks in the room here in Raleigh, you have a copy of this in your hand. The people remote, I don't believe you have a copy on hand or on your screen right now, except for this one. So take a good look at it because we're going to ask some questions. I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Right, so this is a food label for macaroni and cheese. But I really want to break this down and take a closer look at it to really help you figure out what to look for and what the information means. So the first thing, the most important thing that I need you to look at is the serving size. That's going to tell you how much one serving is based on the company's definition. Currently, there are not defined or specified serving sizes. So for example, a serving of cereal could be anywhere from a half a cup to a cup and a quarter. It could be 3/4 of a cup, 2/3 of a cup. They're not defined. So looking at the serving size is very important. In this example, a serving size, right, is a cup. The next thing I want you to see is that the servings per container is 2 cups. And we're talking about, you know, the box of Kraft mac and cheese. Now, I'm not going to ask how many folks have actually eaten the whole box and counted it as one serving, but I know that's happened in my house before with the teenage boys. And I keep going, but that's 2 servings. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is the serving size and the number of servings per container. If something is a small, I consider a small container, be very careful with this. I have seen packages where servings per container are listed as 1.5. Right? And again, it's all because the serving size influences everything else on the rest of the label. So in this example, again, well, we're going to go through the whole label. But in this one, to determine the calories, right, there will be in more than one serving. We're looking at the amount of the serving size and the number of calories. So in this example, how many calories are in the 2 servings of the mac and cheese? Right, so it's the 500. Okay. Oops, keep clicking on this one. So if you eat the whole pack, you've got the 500 calories, which also means, if we look back at this label, oops, right here, which also means that everything else on this label is going to be doubled. So here, if it's going to be the calories from fat, we're going to go up to 220. It also means that anything listed below in this area, in the bottom half of the label, is also going to be doubled, whether it's good or bad. So that's why looking at the serving size and number of servings per container and then figuring out how much you're going to eat of that package is very important. Otherwise, the information on this label doesn't really reflect what's going on. All right, you guys. Are we good so far? Okay. All right, so again, remember, calories come from carbs, fat, and protein. They give us energy. Carbs are our primary energy source for our body. Needed to just do things that we're doing every day, or basic functions, especially if you guys are running the 5K later, you know, hope you got some carbs in your lunch because you're going to need that energy. In this one, The 250 calories are the total calories from everything, the carbs, the fat, the protein. It does list, like I pointed out a little while ago, separately the calories from fat, right? We're watching that fat intake and we want to know how many calories are coming from it. So what that really means is that if I'm having 110 calories from fat, I'm really only getting 140 calories from the carb and the protein. You with me on that? Okay. Let's talk about the percent daily values for a minute, because this is where sometimes it's very, very confusing. So they're based on the amount of nutrients you should get every day, right? So well, let's look at this and we'll look at the slide again. It tells you what percent nutrients are contained in one serving. So again, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you eat the entire package, we're going to bump that number up. These numbers are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. And this is important to keep that number in mind. It's also listed on the label at the very, very bottom in small print that these numbers are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. If you get fewer or allocated fewer than 2,000 calories per day, what that means is that all of those numbers, the percentages, are going to be higher because it's based on a percent of 2,000 calories. We're going to look at it a little bit more in a minute, but I want to point that out as we're starting to go along. To keep in mind that it's based on the serving size, one serving and that serving size, and it's based on 2,000 calories. Okay, so for the mac and cheese, for example, shows that one serving provides 20% of the daily recommended intake for calcium. So it means you got to get 80% of your calcium from somewhere else, basically, is what it means, right? If you eat the whole box, I got 40% of my calcium for the day. Not where I want you to get 40% of your calcium for the day, to be sure, but just understanding that these numbers get doubled if that's in fact what you do is eat the entire box. The same thing runs with our total fat and our other numbers. So total fat refers to the total grams of fat in one serving. They're going to pull out the saturated fat and the trans fats. They're listed separately. We're listing those separately because we're trying to focus, or we want to have a greater intake of the good fats, right? So on this slide, oopsie, I get backwards. So on this slide, it lists the saturated fat and the trans fats. Those two items have to be listed on the label. There's no option for that. Some food labels will list unsaturated fats as a general grouping or a mono or a polyunsaturated fat. Those are the better fats. Those don't have to be listed by law, but some packages have them. But you will always find saturated and trans because those are the ones we're trying to moderate for the negative effects they have on our body. Okay. Good fats, again, these are the ones I'm trying to get more of. The unsaturated fats, the healthy ones, the omega fats are in this group. They're going to come from things like your nuts, your seeds, your avocados, your fish, the olive oil, those types of things. What I want you to understand, though, is that even something healthy like a nut or a salmon or coconut oil, most fats are composed of both saturated and unsaturated fats. So even though nuts are really healthy and I want you to eat them because of their health benefits, if you look at a food label or the label on a package of nuts, you're going to see a number for saturated fats. Now, I'm probably going to say, look at the ingredient listing and see if those nuts were roasted in another oil, because often nuts are roasted in another oil, which increases the saturated fat content. But even if it's a raw almond or a raw, whatever kind of nut you want to eat, it's probably going to have a number listed for saturated fats. Not that it's been added, but it occurs naturally. So it's not that we're avoiding all saturated fats, but I want you to become aware that quite often there's a combination in a food item. Does that make sense? Right, because we think of the bad fats, man, this thing's sensitive. We think about the bad fats and we think those are the ones I really want to avoid, right? Especially the saturated and trans fats. Generally are coming from the places that we're looking for them. The sources are these: the processed foods, the fried foods, commercial baked goods, those giant muffins that you buy at Starbucks or the grocery store, the cookies, the scones. Any of my commercial baked products are real culprits for that. Even things like cereal bars and crackers. So be aware, quite often when we look at something, let's say like a cereal bar, and it lists an amount for saturated fat, some of that saturated fat is coming from added fats that they've added to the cereal bar. But if it's got nuts in it, a little bit of that saturated fat's also going to come from the nuts. So sometimes it makes it a little difficult for us to delineate how much is occurring naturally from the nuts or seeds that's in it and how much is coming from added fats. The natural saturated fats, I'm going to talk about this for just a second because this has been a real hot topic in the past several years with good reason. You see that when I'm listing the food sources of saturated fats, I'm not listing things that occur naturally. I'm not listing full fat dairy. I'm not listing our oils. I'm not listing, I think, what else has a lot of saturated fat? Some of our meat products, right? We want to watch our saturated fat in total, but I really want you to focus on the saturated fat that is added to foods versus saturated fat that occurs naturally in a product, like a nut or a dairy product. Does that make sense? And again, you're going, as we look at that food label, you will be able to tell fat's been added. They've obviously added, a vegetable oil to this product, didn't occur naturally in the, say, dairy. That's going to be an added, probably saturated fat. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Let's see what my next one is. Let me get through fats and I'll answer it. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So again, our calories from fat, we're looking at the big picture. We're trying to get no more than 30% of our total calories per day from fat. About 7% is the limit that we're trying to get from saturated fat. So of the 30%, 7% of that can come from saturated fat. So for example, if you have a 2,000 calorie diet, that's your allotment, that's the standard number we use, you would want to have no more than 67 grams of total fat per day and 16 grams from saturated fat, including naturally occurring and added saturated fats. Okay. All right, let me pause for a second. Are we okay with that, right? The numbers here? Okay, we did have a question that I want to answer. Yes, ma'am. Oh, hang on just a sec for the.
Thank you, sorry. On the slide, it has 12 grams of total fat, 3 saturated, 3 trans. You mentioned that there are some fats that don't need to be accounted for in that calculation. How do those unaccounted for fats impact the percentages that you have outlined there? Or how should we be aware of those?
Right, so usually, and I think this is going to answer, the unaccounted for fats, so to speak, would be the unsaturated fats that aren't listed. So if this one has 12 grams total and it has 3 from saturated and 3 from trans, that leaves me 6 unaccounted for, right? So we are going to give that 6 towards my unsaturated fat. I'll say the unsaturated fat pool. So that's where I'm going to say that's where they're coming from. Does that make sense? And again, that's why I said quite often the unsaturated fats, the polyunsaturates and the monounsaturates aren't listed on the label because they don't have to be, because we're really focusing on the saturated and the trans that are causing us those problems health-wise. Trans fats, we've got a lady over there. Trans fats are the ones that we're trying to keep at 0. So on this slide, when we say, oops, sorry, guys, they go so fast when I hit this. On this side, when we talk about a 7% can come from saturated fat, 0% should come from trans fats. Trans fats, in about 99.9% of cases, are something that has been added to the food. They very rarely occur naturally. So that's someone we're trying to keep to 0. Another question.
My question is about the oils. You said they come under unsaturated. I mean, olive oil and coconut oil, they come under unsaturated fat. So how about the other oils like canola and vegetable oil and things like that?
Right, so oils in general, remember I said that all oils contain some combination of saturated and unsaturated fats. Our better choices when we look at the ratio of saturated to unsaturated are the olive oil is about our best choice. The ratio in canola oil is a really good ratio, but there's some, I hate to say issues, but there's some issues with how canola oil is processed and if it retains the favorable ratio in the processing. So if you choose to use canola oil, you want to use one that's a cold expeller pressed, is what the label should say. It's going to cost more than the the canola oil that's I'll say mass marketed, but you're looking for the cold expeller pressed canola because that does not negatively impact the ratio of the saturated to the unsaturated fats. Coconut oil is a little bit of an outlier because coconut oil is very high in saturated fat, but it's the type of unsaturated fat. And so now we get into a little bit of not splitting hairs, but we start to get pretty detailed when we go, but this unsaturated fat is a better choice because of these various reasons, right? And it gets into more kind of biochemical things in your body, to tell you the truth. So that's why even though coconut oil does have a high percentage of saturated fat, it's actually a favorable oil, and we're still using it, or we're using it more, perhaps. Yes, ma'am.
So is there any difference in extra virgin and the other version, the not the virgin ones?
Right. So is there a difference between the extra virgin and the other olive oils? Yes. You really want to, if it's at your price point, to use the extra virgin olive oil. It's the first pressing, and it's, I'll say, the purest or the most pure version. The closer you can get to extra virgin, the better it's going to be. And those are usually be lighter in color. I will make a comment about that. I think in next week's newsletter, my newsletter that I'm sending out next week, I'm pretty sure I'm going to write it on food fraud. I have it halfway written. And food fraud is a newsletter worthy topic, but it's affecting olive oil where they're taking lesser oils, maybe the second or third pressing of olive oil, and they're either diluting the extra virgin olive oil with a later pressing to reduce the amount of extra virgin olive oil, which lowers their cost of production, but it doesn't lower your price point that you're paying for it. So there's some issues going on with olive oil right now as far as it being not necessarily what they're saying. Our better options, if you can get, I mean, and it's expensive, more expensive, but a true Italian produced in Italy olive oil, because they have stricter laws and regulations than we do, and they're monitoring it more closely than in the US. Sometimes I have the bad news, but that's what we're trying to do. Was there one over here? Yes, sir.
So getting back to the label and the numbers, you said trans fat, you're trying to get 0 there, right?
Correct.
Okay. So the question is this. When can they legally put 0 on there? Because 1 gram is significant for trans fat. And I've seen labels like for peanut butter and things like that that have hydrogenated oils in them, and they say 0, but the serving size is tiny. So how do you know when you're going to get into trouble? And
Right.
what does that 0 really mean? Like, can it be 0.5 or do they have to show 0.5? You know, how does that work?
Yep. No, that's a great question, and I promise I didn't set them up to do that. So the answer is, legally, if the amount of trans fat per serving is below 0.5, so if it is 0.49, they are legally able to put 0 on the label and put on the front of the package trans fat free, because somewhere there's going to be an asterisk that's going to say per serving. And this is again where food manufacturers and people who create the labels know that we're looking for this now, and they will manipulate serving size. So you're exactly right. Sometimes they make very unrealistically low or small serving sizes in order for the information on the label to look acceptable to us. So how do we know, right? I look at the peanut butter and it says 0 grams of trans fat, but when I look at the ingredient listing, it clearly says, well, what would it say? Does anybody know what words we're looking for that indicates if trans fats contained in a product? Yep, hydrogenated people are afraid to shout out, so thanks. Hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. And it could say partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated, any oil in the world you want after that. If it says those words, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, there is trans fat in that product. No question. If it says 0 on the label, 0 on the front of the package, it is in there. And again, that's where we get into, I'm gonna have to remember which way to move this slide again. These products, again, our processed foods. This is why I'm saying, look at your crackers, look at your cereal bars, look at that ingredient listing, because even though the label may say 0, there's some in there. Yes, ma'am.
Here, why did they not list percentage daily value for proteins and sugar?
We're going to, I promise you, we're going to work our way down the label in just a minute. If I don't answer it, then please ask again. I have a question online.
It's kind of a two-part question. How accurate are the food apps using pictures to calculate nutrition and calories? And do you have any app recommendations for that?
And I'll give you the dual answer. So how accurate are the apps if you take a picture? I have clients who send me pictures, and you've got to have a fair amount of information, in all honesty. I mean, the size of the plate, it's an estimate. I'll say that it's going to give you an estimate. It's better than no information, but it's not going to give you an answer like this is a half a cup of something. It's just not going to be as accurate because, again, we have a lot of variables. How large is the plate? Is it a deep plate? Is it how much is really piled up? Is it more dimensional? Can you see the volume of food on the plate? So that's a tougher one. I'm going to talk about, hopefully, we will get to have some time at the end because I do have an app that I recommend that is my very favorite app, and so hopefully we'll have time to discuss it, and if not, it will be in the slides, so you can always look back at the slides, but hopefully we'll get there. Yes, ma'am.
Are they going to ever possibly put some regulation in there? Because if not, it seems like the manufacturers can always tweak the serving size so it falls like the trans, fats would always fall just under what they have to record.
Right, they can keep playing that game forever. Food labels are going to change. There are changes that are coming in 2017, probably mid to late 2017. They are not regulating serving size, so they're not going to say a serving of ice cream is always, well, right now it's usually half a cup. I mean, how realistic is that? Like, who's eating half a cup of ice cream? But that's their serving size. But they're going to try and narrow them into a range. I know it's still not perfect, but it's better than it just being, from 1 to 1,000,000. They're going to try and have it between, 1 and 50. So they're trying, but there's so much resistance from food manufacturers and producers, and they have strong lobbies. So we're making some progress. Yeah, we may have to talk about food labels again. All right, can I pause? I'll answer your question. Now I'm going to pause for a minute so we can, because I'm watching the clock to try and keep moving along for us. Yes, sir.
So question I had was statement you made previously about the saturated fat. It should be about 7%. So even the good saturated fat, like nuts and everything, we should limit it to 7%.
Yes, saturated fat, we're trying to go for 7% total. And I want it to be 7% of the from the source of food that carries a good fat with it. So if some of my saturated fat is coming from nuts, I'm going to try and still keep total to 7% because I'm getting the positive benefit from the nuts.
And I mean, fats are again also connected with the cholesterol, right? And so if sometimes you are reducing your fat, the bad fat, and increasing your good fat to reduce the cholesterol. So how would that, even if you are trying that, you should not be going beyond 7% to increase your good cholesterol, especially because the problem is with vegetarians. We don't get it, and so that's the main thing.
Right, and so that goes back to this information on this slide. So we're trying to keep our total fat to 30% of our daily calories. That's my total number. right? Of that 30%, I'm trying to keep 7% from saturated fat. Does that make sense? So I can have lots of good fats. I'm just keeping that saturated numbers when I'm keeping my eye on, which still leaves me plenty of leeway to have the healthier fats, the olive oils, the nuts, the seeds, but I am tracking the amount of saturated fat from those sources and trying to keep it to, say, in this example, the 16 grams. Does that make sense? Right, and the real problem, the real issues with cholesterol are the saturated fats, the trans fats is a huge one, and sugar, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So sugar is becoming a bigger player, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. Let me see how close we are to sugar. So let me hit cholesterol real quick, right? Want to keep our eye on it. We're trying to limit it to about, 300 milligrams or so a day. I will say in this year's recommendations for healthy Americans, actually in this 5-year block of time from 2015 to 2020, the government dropped the cholesterol recommendation. They're no longer telling us that we need to limit it to 300 milligrams. They're more interested in our saturated and trans fats and sugar as it relates to cholesterol. And we're going to get to sugar in a minute, but there's a stronger connection now they have realized between sugar increasing my cholesterol values than the cholesterol I consume for foods. So eggs are back on the table again, shrimp and scallops are back on the table again, candy's out again. Like another reason maybe to get candy out again. Okay, oops. For sodium, let's hit it real quick. We're trying to keep everyone around 2,400 milligrams or so. There's a little bit of debate about this in the scientific world, but for now we're sticking at 2,400 milligrams. Certain populations do have a lower sodium recommendation, which I'll tell you what it is, but I'm also going to say it's very hard to stay at 2,400 milligrams a day. The other number that's recommended is 1,500 milligrams a day, which is close to impossible to stick with. But the people that would have this 1,500 milligram a day recommendation are anybody over 50, if you have high blood pressure or heart disease, if you have any kind of kidney or renal involvement, or if you're African American of any age. They're asking you to try and stick to 1,500 milligrams or below, which I'm just going to tell you, I mean, we can do it, but you're going to be cooking everything at home pretty much from scratch, and it's a challenge. 2,400 is a challenge. Sometimes I'll say play the sodium game. Just track how much sodium you consume for 2 or 3 days and see how close you come to this number to see, again, where your high sodium intake is coming from and where you're coming as in relation to the recommendation. Okay. So for these numbers, to give you some general reference points when you're looking at the label, right, my target is going to be less than 5%. So less than 5% is low, and that's what I'm trying to get. So when you look at your food label, and you look, I knew I was going to hit that microphone. I'm sorry, guys. When you look at your food label, in the column on this side for your fat, cholesterol, and sodium, you would like those percentage numbers to be at 5% or less. That's what I'm aiming for. If it's over, do I put 20%? If it's over 20%, we're considering it high. And really, I want you to go ahead and put that food or that box, whatever's coming in, back on the shelf. Okay? So those are, again, some of our reference point numbers. We're going for 5 or less, 20 and higher, we really don't want to eat it. So that gives you a little flex in between to make a decision, but if it's 20 or more, we're definitely putting it back. Okay. Oh, and there's my label again. All right, so again, and I'm looking at this percent daily value is what I'm referring to. We're going to look at it for vitamins and minerals in a few minutes. Okay, oops, man, this thing's sensitive. So sometimes we want to be on this aisle, right? The no nutrition label aisle. It's kind of the don't ask, don't tell. It's the ignorance is bliss. I have no living idea. Therefore, I'm not responsible, but it tastes yummy and I'm going to eat it. Right? Not the aisle I want you to be on. I want you to be informed in making these decisions to preserve your good health. Okay, let's talk about carbs for a minute. So total carbs are listed, right? And this is going to include sugars, fiber. You're always going to see these two items listed. So under total carbs, you're always going to have the fiber and the sugar. Fiber, we're trying to get about 25 to 35 grams a day. That's another one sometimes. I'll ask you to occasionally play the fiber game, track your fiber for 2 to 3 days as closely as you can and see how much fiber you're consuming. Are you eating 15 grams? Are you up at 30? Where are you in this continuum? Right? Fiber is something that helps our body with every disease state known, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes, you name it, fiber's a player. So again, we're really trying to get people to increase their intake because most Americans consume really about 10 or 15 grams a day. So we're woefully low. But fiber will always be listed. Sugar, as the current label stands, sugar includes both natural and added sugars. This is something that will be changed on the new food labels. Excuse me, in the new food labels, there will be a line that says natural sugars and there will be a line that says sugar, and then below that line, it will say added sugar. So you will clearly be able to see in a box of Raisin Bran, for example, how much of the sugar has been added, and then we do the quick math, and we know the other sugar amount is coming naturally from the raisins. Does that make sense? We worked hard to get that on the new labels, and I'm really excited about it. Otherwise, it's very difficult for us to look at the labels now, for the average person to look at a label and delineate between added and natural sugars. That's where you've got to drop down to the ingredient listing and start looking for the words, that say sugar. Then again, that's where they're tricking us, the dextrose or the other OS words. And again, that's something when I sit down and talk to people, we talk about a little bit more. I've got a couple handouts that I can get to folks for that. But we're trying to limit it. Sugar has been, again, connected to every disease state, high cholesterol, heart disease, the cancers. The connection to sugar and inflammation in your body and various diseases is just growing and growing and growing. Added sugar is just bad. I mean, as much as we all may love sweets and different things, and they call our name quite often, I really need you to focus, if on nothing else, limiting that sugar intake or becoming aware of how much sugar you're consuming. So play the sugar game and see how much you're consuming over the course of a few days or so. Okay, so what to look for in the label. So when we're looking at, and this is, I think, one of the handouts that I have sent, it should be these next 2 slides. So what do I look for in a label, right? You've given me all this information. Oh my gosh, what am I, summarize it to some extent. So what I'm looking for is this. So say I'm looking for a cereal, because this is one of the things people struggle with. I'm looking for something that's got no more than 25% of my daily value from carbs. If it has, I list a little bit farther than that. If it's a cereal with dried fruit, like a Raisin Bran, we can bump that number up to about 30%. But until we get the food labels that list how much added sugar there is, I still want you to try and keep it to about 30%. I'm trying to get about 5 grams of fiber per serving. We've got to increase our fiber intake. I mean, it's a health issue. So we're trying to bump that up some. If I'm buying something like a meal replacement bar or snack or cereal bars, these are the ones I get the most questions about. For a meal replacement bar, again, this isn't necessarily a middle of the afternoon snack. This is, I had 6 meetings and I haven't been able to eat lunch and I'm eating this as a meal replacement. I'm trying to get about, what I'll give you, about up to about 230 calories, no more than 5 grams of total fat. Again, because most of the time in a cereal bar, unless it's coming from the nuts, it's going to be a lot of added fat. I'm trying to get about 3 to 5 grams of fiber, and I really want you for a meal replacement to get about 10 to 15 grams of protein. If it's a snack or cereal bar, the numbers drop a little bit because this might be my in-between meal snack, right? So I'm still looking to limit that fat intake. The majority of it's probably going to be from saturated fats. That's why I'm limiting it. About 3 grams of fiber, about 7 grams of protein. It's going to give us a good balance if we look for those numbers, and they're not hard to find. Hopefully we'll get to the app that I like, and the app will help you find some of these bars. So those are the numbers I'm looking for. See, even the little wild animals know that they need to read the food labels and make the healthy decision, right? So we've got to do it too. Love that picture. Okay, let me see what's next if it's a good place, because I know I've got a question over here. Okay. Yes, sir.
Sugar is sugar. Why is natural sugar not so bad and added sugar is bad, right? By the end of the day, it's still sugar. What's the difference? And why is it bad for body?
Ooh. It's bad for our body because of the inflammation that it causes, and low-level internal inflammation is what really is causing so many problems disease-wise. I didn't touch anything. Is what's causing so many problems disease-wise, the inflammation in our bodies. At the end of the day, sugar is sugar, and there is a total recommended sugar intake, and that is what I mentioned earlier, that the government had recommended or had dropped the recommendation for cholesterol. So that recommendation has gone. What has kind of taken its place in this 5-year cycle is a recommendation to limit sugar. It's the first time we have ever had a sugar limiting recommendation, or we've had a recommendation to limit our sugar intake in America. There's a lot of politics. We still have subsidies for sugar processors. So it was a big deal to get this done. But again, a lot of work's been put in that area.
But still, why is natural sugar not so bad?
Because it's the way the food was created naturally. So the sugar in an apple, it comes in a package with fiber and fluid and other nutrients. So it's processed somewhat differently in my body than white sugar is out of the sugar bowl. And we're also looking at the total amount of sugar. So if I'm trying to limit my sugar intake to the current government recommendation, which is 40 grams or 10 teaspoons, it's going to be different if I get that 10 teaspoons of sugar today from 1 can of a regular soda. 1 can of regular soda has 10 teaspoons or 40 grams of sugar. Or if I get that 40 grams of sugar from an apple and a pear, and I get a little bit out of my milk this afternoon, and I get it from natural sources. So again, it's almost self-limiting to some extent when it comes to natural foods, or it's easier to limit it that way versus the quantity that has been added to processed foods. That number is usually such a high number, I go past my recommended limit very quickly. Does that make sense? Okay. Archie Gars. Yes, ma'am, online question.
One question. What does it mean when an ingredient is listed and it's immediately followed by parentheses that list other ingredients?
Yeah, and so sometime on a food label, let's say that I'm eating something that has chocolate chips in it or chocolate in it. It's usually going to say something like, chocolate chips. And then in parentheses, it's going to say sugar, cocoa, and then a bunch of other words that we may or may not understand, right? Some kind of fat's going to be in there. So quite often it's an item that is made up of other items, and the parentheses is listing what those other items are, right? So in this example that I gave you, where it's a chocolate chip and it says like sugar, cocoa, milk, fat, something else. Those are real words that we understand, but quite often they're words that we don't know what they mean. And again, sometimes when the chocolate chips aren't really made from chocolate, or if you get, let's say, a blueberry muffin mix, quite often, I hate to tell you this, those aren't real blueberries in there, right? It's a whole bunch of chemicals that were made purple and made to taste like a blueberry, but it's not a real blueberry. And that might be an example where you see, it says blueberries, and then it'll have parentheses and all these chemical words that none of them say blueberry in them. So quite often that's what it means. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about sugar. I have seen in some labels the word says sugar alcohol. What type of sugar is that? Is that something that we need to watch for? I mean, what kind of sugar is that?
So a sugar alcohol can occur naturally, or it can be added to a food. Usually when you see a sugar alcohol listed on the label, it's been added to a food. Sugar alcohols stay in your gut. They are not absorbed through the gut. So they're a way of having sweetness or a sweet flavor to a food without you absorbing them and having to count the calories, so to speak, or having the impact that sugar would have on your blood sugars. The problem with sugar alcohols, number one, they're added. And so we're trying to avoid adding as many things as possible to our foods. The real issue becomes in GI upset and GI issues. people are usually sensitive sometimes to small amounts of sugar alcohol, sometimes large quantities, because a lot of GI upset, gas, diarrhea, bloating, very unpleasant side effects because they stay in your gut and they're not absorbed. And it's really an interaction between the sugar alcohol and the gut bacteria. And they don't play well together. And some people's tummies are more sensitive and some people's aren't. Okay, guys, let's jump on for a minute. Okay, talk about protein. We had a protein question earlier, right? So protein in our body is needed for a lot of stuff, right? I mean, most of your body really is made of protein. You've got to have it. You have to have it. We need it for hormone production. We need it for so many key functions in our body that we don't think about. Things that it does that we don't even think about. Again, tissue repair, blood maintenance. There is not a recommended amount or a recommended percentage of protein on the food label because for most Americans, it's not an issue. Americans eat plenty of protein. You know, you've got like the big steak and usually the baked potato, and there may or may not be a vegetable to be had. I mean, traditional, I'll say, American diet. For those folks, luckily, like a lot of you guys that are way more tuned in to what's better for my body, we're reducing the amount of protein. We're choosing alternate protein sources. For my vegetarians, especially my vegans, that's something that we pay attention to. I mean, I always want to make sure you're getting adequate protein, whether it's through your beans and peas and lentils. Again, a lot of people who are from the India, Pakistan region of the world, you know, they've always got great lentil intake, beans, veggies that are full of protein. But for someone who is, I'll say, who did not grow up as a vegetarian perhaps and is just trying to move in that direction for good positive reasons, always want to make sure that you are getting adequate protein as well as some other nutrients that you might be missing. Okay. Did that answer okay why there's no percent who asked me for protein? Okay, must be good. Okay, vitamins and minerals, we're going to look at kind of the bottom half of that label. Tells you the percent daily value, has to legally for certain nutrients. These nutrients are going to change in the new labels. They're going to shuffle them around and what we're going to see in the new labels. But for now, we have specific nutrients that we're looking at. Other vitamins and minerals may also be included, especially if it's a positive number. They want you to know there's a lot of something, so they want to get credit for it, so to speak. But these are the ones that have to be listed by law. Here, my target numbers are almost the opposite. I want something to be 20% or higher. If it's 5% or less, it's a very low value, and I'd prefer you try or choose something else to eat, simply because the nutrient value or the nutrient density is so low, it's kind of not worth investing your calories, grams of fat, grams of carbohydrates. You're just not getting very much bang for your buck. Basically, I want you to get a lot of bang for your buck on it. Does that make sense? So here I'm looking for those higher numbers. Food labels contain a lot of information. As we've talked through it today, and if you look at them, even again, just looking at, you know, your mac and cheese label, there's a lot of numbers on this thing. And then there are those little words at the bottom sometimes that get confusing also. So a lot of information on them. So, oops, man, this thing is really sensitive. So the app I want to talk about, let me jump back. Any questions to this point? Any other questions? Are we doing well? Yep.
How do you feel about a multivitamin to supplement what you get in your food?
Yeah, so how do I feel about multivitamins? A multivitamin to me is an insurance policy, right? I mean, we're trying to eat well. I try and eat really well, I swear. Trying to get all the things I need, meet all the nutrient values, get all the anti-inflammatory things, but sometimes it's just hard to do for whatever reasons, especially, you know, if I'm saying, and I'm staying within X many calories for the day. A multivitamin to me is an insurance policy. If my body needs some nutrient or more of a nutrient, say that my body, I don't know it, but my body's fighting a cold virus or some other bug that's gotten in my body, and I need extra vitamin C right now. My body's really using a lot, trying to keep me healthy. I don't know this, but my body needs it. If I have that multiple vitamin that has vitamin C in it, then my body has an additional source of vitamin C to do what it needs to do and hopefully keep me from getting sick. instead of me getting sick and then I start taking extra vitamin C or zinc or the other types of things. So it's a bit of an insurance policy to me. You want to always take the multivitamin with food or soon after you've eaten, right? For a couple of reasons. Number one, my stomach acid is higher at that point. I'm more likely, even with good quality multivitamins, to break it down to make sure it dissolves and it is broken down so my body can access the nutrients. For anything that's fat soluble, like vitamins E or A, that needs some fat in order, fat soluble means that that vitamin has to be connected to fat in order to be escorted across my gut lining into my system, right? So it's got to be escorted by fat. No fat, no escort. I cannot absorb the fat soluble vitamins. So another reason I want to take it with or near a meal is because most of the times when we eat whatever we eat, there is some degree of fat in it, even if it's naturally occurring fat that's in the whole grain item. We don't think about it, but there's a little bit in there, enough to help those vitamins be absorbed properly. So those are the two. Well, okay, the third reason is because sometimes multivitamins kind of make you feel icky. If I have it with food, you don't get that icky feeling most of the time. Gummies, I'll say, are not adequate. And I know people hate swallowing big pills. Sorry, you guys. But gummies just are not able to contain an adequate amount of nutrients. They're usually very limited what's in them. If you have an issue swallowing the vitamins or the big ones, I'll say like do a Flintstones chewable or like a kid's chewable. You may have to do 2, but you're getting a better nutrient range and value versus doing a gummy. Is that answered? Okay. Okay. All right, you guys, so let's talk for just a minute about, let me mention this real quick. I am going to, if you guys want to get my newsletter, I send it out once a week. Every other week I do recipes, and the off week I do things like food fraud for nutrition education. For you guys in the room, you can sign up on the iPad, and there's also a hard copy. We'll get it around. There's a hard copy in the back if you're interested that you can sign up on that form on the way out. You folks online, you can email me. I'll give you my email address. She's like, don't mail them to me. But we'll get it. You let somebody know. We'll get you on it. Okay, so my very favorite app, and I really get excited about this one when I discovered it. Actually, somebody here turned me on to it who's not here anymore. Lori Osborne turned me onto this one. She was always like ahead of the game on everything. So this app is called Foodcate, Foodcate, like educate, but with food on the front end. Here's why I love this app. You can use it to track your activity. You can use it as a food tracker if you want to. You may not use it for any of those things, but here's what happens. You go to the grocery store or to your own kitchen cabinet. You pull out a food item, right, and you scan the barcode. In this example, actually it's from online. I went in and I just pulled up, you can see from the drop-down menu on the left side, all of these different food categories. I selected, whatever I picked, I think snacks. And then I picked snack bars. And so it gave me this listing of the most popular snack bars. You can see up here at the top, I had them sorted by popular. So it gave me the list of snack bars. What this app does is it takes the nutrient information, both what's on the label and based on the ingredients, and it crunches the numbers through some magical formula and comes up with a letter grade. As you can see, A, B, C, D, put it back on the shelf. I mean, so it gives me this letter grade. So instead of me standing there with all of this information that we've talked about today and saying to myself, okay, is this a good choice or not? I've got all the data. I see this information. Should I buy it or not? This app says, and here's the letter grade, right? I can see why something happens. So in this example, for this Fiber 1 bar, I can click on it and say, why does it get this grade? Now, this is from my phone app. Right, so in this one, I pulled it up on my phone the same way, gave it that letter grade. It just didn't have the drop-down screen on the left, but otherwise it listed them like this. And I said, well, why? Why did it get a C? And it tells me, right? It's got multiple sugars in the ingredients. It's highly processed. In this case, it had too much fiber because they've added so much fiber to it, and that's why it has a C. So I'm standing there again in the grocery store aisle, and I'm like, okay, well, if I can't have this one, then what's a better choice? Then what should I be buying? Right? Super helpful, usually to me in the yogurt and the cereal aisle. So what should I get? Just tell me what to get. At the top of this page, you'll see 3 tabs. It says product, it says explanation, nutrition, and alternatives. That's the key that I want you to use. You click on the button that says alternatives, and it gives me a listing of other cereal bars similar to the one I clicked on that have a higher letter grade. So now I don't have to pick up 20 different cereal bar boxes and scan them or look in the information. I just push the button and say, tell me what to buy already. And then I look again, see if they're in my store, see if that's what I want to buy. So to me, the beauty of this app is I don't have to stand there going through label after label after label, me trying to analyze, well, you know, it's low in sugar, but it's higher in something else. And is it calories? I mean, is it a buy or a don't buy? The app just guides me through it by giving it this grade. And so again, once I kind of have my list of things I know I like to buy at the store, it keeps my life easy. Or if there's a new product and you want to know, is it a better than, is this new yogurt better than the one I normally buy, you can use the app to do the same thing. So again, I can use this app to track my activity. I can use it as a food tracker if you want to play the sugar tracking game or the fiber tracking game. Or I can just use it to help me make a better decision when I'm shopping. Because again, food labels are very overwhelming. I look at them in the store and I look at all the information, and sometimes I'm standing there too going, should I buy it or not? Or is there a better choice? Do I have to keep looking at all the packaging? And who has time for that in reality? So that's my favorite app. This is, again, my email. Oh, look, I have a .com. Okay, well, that's a typo. So that's not going to get you to me. That's my website. You can send me something by Twitter, Instagram, whatever you want to. My email is Andrea @NutritionAndrea if you want to email me, again, to add to the newsletter or have some questions. If you have a lot of questions, I may email you back and say, let's meet. Let's like do a virtual meeting, and that's fine too. Questions. So that being said, any other questions here in the room to begin with? And I'm going to hang, as we're getting the microphone to her, I'm going to hang out for a little while afterwards, you guys, if you want to ask me something that you don't want to shout out for the whole room. So I'm happy to do that also. Yes, ma'am.
So I know that, of course, protein is important, especially for vegetarians, but I hear a lot of negative things about soy right now, and I also hear a lot of good things about soy.
Right.
So what is the general verdict on soy products, like even edamame versus tofu versus all the other things that have it added?
Yep, so if I'm going to, as a vegetarian or as someone who perhaps is just decreasing my meat intake in general terms, the primary thing I'm watching for is genetically modified in the soy arena. And I'm trying to remember what the latest statistic I read was. If it was 85 or 90% of all soy produced in the USA is genetically modified. I know there's a lot of controversy there. You know, the man is telling us that genetically modified is fine, fine, fine. You're going to be fine, keep eating it. Well, they've told me that about a lot of things over the history of time, that later on they go, oops, new science, we were wrong. You know, sorry about that. So again, it's kind of your decision, but I suggest that you try and find the non-GMO soy products. Sometimes you can find them more readily, I'll say at international supermarkets. Other countries, not America, have much stricter laws and rules about genetically modified products. So sometimes it's easier to find the products we're looking for at other places. As far as any interaction with our hormones or phytoestrogens, no real connection has ever been shown. The only people we limit, that I ask to eliminate or limit soy products with, are men who have high PSA levels or a really strong family history of prostate cancer. If you don't have those issues, soy is shown to be cancer protective for men. So until that becomes an issue, that's about the only crowd, or if you have an issue, that's the only crowd that I really ask to eliminate the soy products. Because once there is an active cancer or PSA is going up, then it does seem to feed it. But otherwise, it seems to be protective. Any other questions in the room or online? The remote folks? Okay, you guys, there are going to be a couple handouts coming to you if we're still on. Another one looks like this, Understanding Food Labels or Food Nutrition Labels. Hopefully it will add to what we've talked about today and give you some further guidance. It's something keep in my hand, share with the family. There's also a brand name shopping list that is from a group called named Supermarket Savvy. They're run by dietitians, and they basically evaluate food, common grocery items, and give you all kinds of marks about how much carbs it has, if it's low sugar, low sodium. It's just easy sometimes to flip to, this one's like the frozen meal section and say, if I really have to have a frozen meal, what are my better choices? If I want something else, a sauce for my stir fry, what's a better choice? Or have some kind of a leg up before you even get in the store. It's about, I think, 10 or so pages, so print it if you choose to. If not, it's in the PDF. I thank everyone for being here today in person and online also. When the new food labels come out, we can do it again.
Thank you, Andrea. Just one quick reminder, there is a tablet floating around for the newsletter. If you have not got that yet, there is a manual sign-up sheet in the room. If you want to send us what's the best way for the online people to get your newsletter?
Either email me directly at Andrea@NutritionAndrea. They can sign up on my website, which is not .com. But
So if you go to the website or the email address on the page you're seeing right now, you can get her newsletter also. Everybody who pre-signed up ahead of time today, I should have sent you something during the presentation, the handouts that Andrea referenced, so you should have those. Another quick reminder, this was recorded, so if you need to go back and reference that, it will be posted sometime this week. Thank you very much.